The house at the edge of the suburban neighborhood sat quietly beneath a chill autumn sky. The trees, once vibrant with life, had shed their leaves, leaving the ground carpeted in rust-colored debris. A breeze stirred the dry leaves across the yard, their brittle whispers cutting through the stillness. It was a picturesque setting, one that should have brought peace, but something about it unsettled me. Lauren and I had just moved in. After years of living in the city, we had hoped for something quieter, something calmer. We had found the perfect house, neat, comfortable, and, as I like to think, full of potential. But as soon as we stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. The neighborhood seemed untouched by time, its houses as still and unchanging as the lives of the people who inhabited them. The neighbors nodded as they passed by, but no one spoke. There was no chatter on the sidewalks, no children playing in front yards, no sounds of music drifting through open windows. The place felt as if it had been frozen in time, abandoned by the world. The strangest among them was Mrs. Elkins. She lived across the street in a yellow house, her presence so constant that it felt impossible to ignore. From the moment I stepped outside, I noticed her always behind her curtains, her pale face peering out, her eyes never leaving us. I never saw her leave the house, and yet she always seemed to know everything about the neighborhood. It was as if she were watching, observing, waiting. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was watching me, too. 1 week before Thanksgiving, I was outside hanging some decorations on the porch. The chill in the air was a reminder that the season had turned, that the year was drawing to a close. I was adjusting the garlands of fake autumn leaves when I heard her voice. "Are you two doing Thanksgiving this year?" Mrs. Elkins called from across the street. I turned to see her standing in her front doorway, her hand lightly resting on the frame. She wasn't wearing a coat, despite the cold, and her frail figure seemed to be held together by the thick cardigan she wore, a familiar sight I had grown used to seeing through the window. "Yes," I said with a nervous smile, trying to seem friendly. "Just a small dinner." She smiled back, but it wasn't a warm smile. There was a strange sadness behind her eyes, something that unsettled me. "I used to love Thanksgiving. It's been a while." Her words hung in the air like an omen. It felt like she wasn't just talking about the holiday, it was as if she were talking about something deeper, something personal. When Lauren came outside, we invited Mrs. Elkins to join us, not thinking much of it at first. Thanksgiving was about family and friends, after all, and she seemed so alone. But as she murmured, "That's very kind of you," there was something in her voice that made my heart race. It sounded like she had already accepted what she knew would happen. The day of Thanksgiving arrived, colder than expected. The sky was thick with heavy clouds that promised rain but never delivered. The house was filled with the smells of roasting turkey and sweet potato pie, but something about the atmosphere felt off. The air was heavy, pressing in on my chest, as though the world itself were holding its breath. I crossed the street to fetch Mrs. Elkins, my footsteps crunching over the fallen leaves. When I knocked on her door, it creaked open before I could even reach for the handle. She greeted me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, her gaze distant and unreadable. She wore her usual thick cardigan, but the cold did not seem to affect her. In fact, she didn't seem to feel it at all. "I know the way," she said in a low, almost inaudible voice. Without waiting for a reply, she stepped past me and started walking toward our house, her steps unnervingly quiet on the sidewalk. It was as if she didn't need to make a sound, as if her feet weren't even touching the ground. I followed her back to our house, my heart beating faster with each step. The closer we got, the more oppressive the silence became. There was something about the air, something that made it hard to breathe, as if the world were holding its breath along with me. When we arrived, she sat at the table, but she didn't touch her food. She barely moved at all, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her eyes fixed on the empty fireplace. It was as though she were waiting for something, for someone, or perhaps for the very moment to pass. Lauren and I exchanged uneasy glances, but neither of us spoke. Something was wrong. Something was terribly wrong. After dinner, we gathered around the coffee table, our stomachs full and our spirits light, at least for the moment. We laughed, reminisced, and shared stories, and then Lauren excitedly pulled out her phone to show us the group photo she'd taken earlier in the evening. We all smiled, leaning in together. But when Lauren showed us the picture, I felt my stomach drop. There we were, Lauren, Mrs. Elkins, and me, all smiling, captured in a perfect moment of family togetherness. But the seat where Mrs. Elkins had been sitting was empty. I scrolled through the photos one by one, but they were all the same. The same empty seat. There was no blur, no shadow, nothing at all to indicate that she had even been there. Lauren's voice was barely a whisper as she looked at me. I swear she was there. She was sitting right there. But the camera had captured nothing. No trace. No sign that Mrs. Elkins had ever existed in that moment. I couldn't sleep that night. The house felt too quiet, the air too heavy, as if something unseen was waiting in the shadows. The darkness seemed to press down on us, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, that the world we knew had shifted somehow. Lauren went to check on Mrs. Elkins the next morning, but when she returned, her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. "The house is empty," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's no furniture. Just dust and boxes. The windows were dark." I knocked, but no one answered. I didn't want to believe her. It didn't make sense. Mrs. Elkins had been with us the night before. She had sat at the table. She had eaten with us. I refused to believe she was gone. Together, we walked over to her house. The cold had deepened, the air thick with a foreboding silence. When we reached the yellow house, the door creaked open. Inside, there was nothing, no furniture, no belongings, only the emptiness of dust and shadows. We called the non-emergency number, our voices shaking. "Ma'am, that house has been vacant since 2011, the officer said flatly. "No one has lived there for years." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Mrs. Elkins had been dead for over a decade. She hadn't been alive when we met her. She hadn't been alive when she sat with us at the table. The revelation was a blow that shattered everything I had known. Mrs. Elkins, she had been dead all along. And yet, she had been with us. Sitting at our table. Watching us. Lauren and I went to the library, hoping to find something, anything, that might explain what had happened. The librarian, an older woman, barely reacted when we asked about Mrs. Elkins. "She passed away a long time ago," the librarian said. "It was sudden. Heart attack, I think. But she hadn't been seen for a few years before that." We scoured the archives, reading old newspapers and records, and it wasn't until I found a faded clipping that the truth finally became clear. Mrs. Elkins had died 10 years ago. She had been alone, with no family or friends to speak of. And yet, somehow, she had crossed into our world. Somehow, she had joined our Thanksgiving dinner. But why? What did she want? And why had she appeared to us? Was it some unfinished business? A spirit trying to fulfill a forgotten ritual? I couldn't answer any of these questions, and I wasn't sure I wanted to. The night after we discovered the truth, the phone rang again. I picked it up, my heart pounding in my chest. It was the same faint static on the other end, the same whispering voice. "Jack. Don't trust them." And then, the line went dead. I stood there, the phone pressed to my ear, my thoughts spinning in a whirl of fear and confusion. Who was speaking? Mrs. Elkins? Or something else? All I knew was that we had been touched by something that was not of this world. Something that we couldn't escape, no matter how hard we tried. The air grew colder, the shadows longer, and the empty seat at the table felt more like a warning than an invitation. We were not alone. And Mrs. Elkins was not the only one waiting. The road stretched out before us, winding through the dense Oregon wilderness. A heavy fog had settled over the landscape, muffling the world in an eerie silence. The trees, twisted and gnarled, loomed on both sides of the car, their silhouettes barely visible through the thick mist. It was the kind of fog that made you feel like you were driving through a dream, a strange, unsettling dream that seemed to swallow everything around you. I had been looking forward to this road trip for months. A few days away from the grind of daily life, a chance to hang out with Ryan and Kyle, and a break from the endless responsibilities that seemed to pile up. It was supposed to be the kind of trip we'd remember for the good times, the laughs, and the memories we'd make. But then Ryan brought up the Red Oak Diner. I hadn't thought much about it at first. Ryan had this way of talking about random roadside attractions, always hunting down some weird place to visit. But when he mentioned the Red Oak Diner, something shifted in the pit of my stomach. It wasn't just his usual enthusiasm. It was different. There was a strange glimmer in his eyes, like he believed in something more than just an old diner. "It's been closed for years," Ryan said as he drove, his hands gripping the wheel a little tighter than usual. "But every now and then, it opens up for one night. No one knows why, but it's like the place calls you. People talk about it. It's got this pull to it." I stared out the window, trying to shake off the unease that had settled in my chest. The way he talked about it, like it was some kind of mysterious, hidden gem, made me feel like we were heading towards something more. And not in a good way. But I tried to brush it off. It was just a diner, right? A random stop on the road. Nothing to get worked up over. But as we drove deeper into the fog, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were heading towards something that wasn't quite right. Something that was waiting for us. We had been driving for what felt like hours when we finally saw it. The Red Oak Diner, standing alone in the mist, like it had been forgotten by time. It was barely visible through the fog, the outline of the building blending into the gray haze. The first thing I noticed was the neon open sign. It flickered weakly, casting a pale yellow light that seemed almost too bright for the gloom surrounding it. I couldn't help but feel that it wasn't just an old diner. This place, this building, it wasn't just sitting there. It was waiting. The faded paint on the walls, the rusted signs that had long since lost their colors, all of it felt like it had been untouched for decades, and yet, it wasn't. It felt alive, somehow. Ryan pulled the car into the empty lot. The parking lot was eerily quiet. No other cars. No signs of life. Just the diner standing in the distance, its broken windows staring back at us. "Here we are," Ryan said, his voice barely above a whisper. There was excitement in his eyes, but something else too. Something darker. I looked over at Kyle, who was staring at the diner through the fog, his face pale. He looked just as uneasy as I felt. "I don't know about this, man," I said, my voice betraying the tension I was trying to suppress. Kyle shrugged, though his unease was clear. "What's the worst that could happen? It's just an old diner. Let's check it out." We all got out of the car, the fog pressing in on us like a suffocating blanket. The air was thick, almost oppressive, and the silence around us felt unnatural. It wasn't the kind of quiet you expect in the wilderness. It was a stillness that felt wrong, like the world had stopped moving. We walked up to the diner's door, and it creaked open as if it had been waiting for us. I stepped inside first, and the smell hit me immediately, stale air, like the place hadn't been touched in years. The floor creaked under my feet, and the faint hum of the neon sign outside was the only sound that broke the silence. The diner was exactly as Ryan had described, abandoned, forgotten, and decaying. The booths were cracked, the counters scratched and chipped, and the old menu boards hung crooked on the walls. But despite the signs of neglect, the place looked strangely clean. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. "It's just like the stories," Ryan said, his voice tinged with awe. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. There was something unsettling about it, something that made my skin crawl. I didn't want to admit it, but I was scared. The diner was far too quiet, and there was something about the air that made me feel like we were intruding on something we didn't understand. The place wasn't just abandoned, it was waiting for us. I could feel it in my bones. Ryan and Kyle wandered off to explore the place, but I stayed near the counter, trying to shake the feeling of being watched. And then it happened. A plate of food appeared in front of me. It was a full meal: steaming meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans, hot, fresh, and sitting right there in front of me. I hadn't ordered it. I hadn't said a word. I turned around, expecting to see a waitress, but no one was there. No one had come in. No one had made the food. I froze. The weight of the silence seemed to grow heavier, pressing down on me like a physical force. I didn't want to eat it, but I couldn't look away. My stomach churned, my head spinning as I tried to make sense of what was happening. I picked up my fork, my hands trembling as I took a bite. The food tasted real. Too real. Too perfect. It was like I had stepped into some twisted dream where everything was just a little bit too vivid, a little too perfect to be real. But as I ate, the world around me seemed to fade. My vision blurred, and the diner seemed to stretch, elongating in the shadows. The walls felt like they were closing in, the temperature dropping with each passing moment. The food was making me dizzy. My senses were overwhelmed, like I was slipping into a trance. It was as though the diner itself was pulling me deeper, dragging me into its depths. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. But no one was there. I jolted, my heart hammering in my chest. I looked around, but the diner was empty. The bell had sounded like it was coming from just behind me, but when I turned, nothing was there. I stood up, my legs unsteady. I had to get out of there. I tried the door. It wouldn't budge. I yanked on the handle, but it was stuck, as if it had been sealed shut by some invisible force. I could hear my own breath, shallow and rapid, as panic began to take hold of me. The lights flickered, the cold air grew sharper, and I could feel the presence around me. It wasn't just the silence. It was something more. Something in the corners of the room. Watching. Waiting. I could hear footsteps, slow, deliberate. They weren't mine. They weren't Ryan's or Kyle's. I wasn't alone. My pulse was racing, and I couldn't think straight. I had to get out. Now. I ran for the door again, desperation flooding my veins, my hands shaking as I reached for the handle. This time, it opened. The cold night air hit me like a slap in the face as I bolted out of the diner, not looking back. I didn't stop running until I reached the car. My hands fumbled for the keys, and I jumped into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut behind me. Ryan and Kyle were already inside, staring at me with wide eyes. "What happened?" Ryan asked, his voice tight. I couldn't speak. I just shook my head, unable to form the words. My chest felt tight, my body still trembling from the terror that had gripped me inside that place. "We need to go," I finally managed to say, my voice hoarse. "Now." Ryan didn't question me. He started the car, and we drove away, the headlights cutting through the fog. But even as we sped away, I couldn't shake the feeling that the diner was still there, reaching for me. Pulling me back. The neon sign flickered in my mind, an image I couldn't escape. We didn't speak much as we drove. The silence in the car was thick, heavy, like we were all trapped in our own thoughts. The fog pressed in on us from all sides, and I couldn't help but feel that we were being followed, watched by something that wasn't human. Finally, Ryan broke the silence. "I told you it was real," he said, his voice almost too calm, too detached. I looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" "That diner, it's not just a place. It's a door. A doorway. And now, it's open for us. You can't just walk away from it." I stared at him, the weight of his words settling over me like a heavy blanket. I didn't want to believe him, but deep down, I knew he was right. The diner wasn't just a place. It was something else, something dark and ancient, something that reached into your soul and never let go. We were all too silent as we drove on, the road stretching out ahead of us into the unknown. Some places, some moments, they're not just stories. They're warnings. Warnings that some doors should never be opened. Some mysteries should remain unsolved. Because once you step into them, once you allow them in, they never quite let go. And some places never let you leave.